Hello, everybody. Jennifer Bleam here. We are going to be talking about business acquisition. We're going to be talking mergers and acquisition, do's and don'ts, and introducing you to an organization that you need to know if you ever have any plan to sell your business, or if you are thinking about acquiring companies as a strategic way to grow. So I am super proud to announce this partnership with ITX. I've got Tim Mueller on the phone with me, or on the live stream with me, on the phone, on the Zoom, whatever, wherever we are. And Tim is the president. He's the co-founder, and we're going to chat today about ITX, who they help, how they help you, and just talk all around this concept of M&A in this channel and learn a ton of information. So, Tim, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Jennifer, great to be with you and great to partner with you on this effort, and looking forward to talking more about the marketplace and your community and how they could benefit.
Likewise, this is going to be great. All right, so let's kind of start at the top. Tell us about ITX, and more importantly, where did this idea come from? This is your brainchild, so tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thank you. So ITX is 25 years old. We've done over 220 transactions only in the IT space. So we specialize in MSPs, MSSPs, and then certainly channel partners like Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, but only and very deep into the IT space with a focus on smaller mid-market firms. We define that as transactions that are less than 30 million in value. And so my business partner and I have been talking more and more about, how we go to market and how we work with a lot of these owner operators who have founded their business. And we felt the best way to grow the business would be to establish a channel partnership of our own. And so that's where these marketplaces that we've launched, one with your community, and we've got a few others out there. And it gives us an ability to create relationships with these owner operators who are either contemplating the sale of their business now or even 2 to 3 years from now, so that they can feel comfortable. It's clearly one of the biggest decisions that they're ever going to make outside of founding the business to begin with. So to build the trust and to understand really the process was really the genesis behind doing this marketplace with you.
I love that. I mean, my husband has his MSP, and so he is starting to talk about selling, and it's not going to be tomorrow. It will probably be in that 3 to 5 year threshold range. But there are a ton of unanswered questions, and there's really not a lot of great places to go to get the answers, because a lot of times, like I just said, hey, a couple of your colleagues have sold, go talk to them. And he's like, yeah, I tried, they're all under NDA. And I'm like, well, they don't have to tell you what they sold for, but can they just give you tips and tricks? Can they tell you what they learned through the process? Because obviously the first time through anything, you learn a lot. And for most MSPs, it isn't going to be an activity that they do 4 times, 10 times. And so there are probably expensive learning lessons that you learn the first time through, and you don't get a chance to capitalize on making the second sell easier or better. So before we get into maybe some tips and tricks, you mentioned the word marketplace. So can you explain what is the M&A marketplace? What kind of resources are there for the people listening to this?
Yeah, so the marketplace is really the experts that we have at ITX that do all the heavy lifting. So whether it's coaching those MSPs that are contemplating a sale, developing all the materials, the most important part of it is really reaching the right buyers. So we've taken the last 25 years, we've got a data scientist to really hone in on that database of buyers, over 50,000 globally, whether they're private equity firms, strategic buyers that want to grow by acquisition, could be family offices or independent investors that want to go in there. And so what we do is we get to know the seller. Some say, listen, I started the business and I really want to continue on, but I don't want to deal with taxes and HR issues. And I'd rather be, in a prominent place in the family photo of a bigger company than to continue to grow and worry about payroll or sales and marketing. There are others on the other spectrum who are baby boomers who have had different iterations of an IT services business, but the latest of which is an MSP. And they've said, I'd like to sell, maybe stay for a few years. And then there's a great beach down south that I want to end up on. And so we help them unlock the value of that great business that they have built up over the many years. So the who is one issue, but it's the how that we really concentrate on so that we can bring the best buyer and seller together. And I think a lot of that for these owner operators care about what kind of soft landing their employees have. If it's the right fit for the customers that they've dealt with for many years, because they have a reputation and a legacy, they don't want to get tarnished by selling and just hitting the road. And so it's a lot more complicated than just putting a for sale sign out front and trying to find buyers.
Right, absolutely, which is obviously your area of expertise. So let's talk about how the pandemic impacted mergers, acquisitions, this whole, you obviously have lived through that. And I saw a headline pop up that I think maybe we are past the pandemic. So let's hope so. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that is just something that is in the rearview mirror and it can just get further and further behind us. But when we were in the heart of that, how was the pandemic affecting mergers and affecting acquisitions?
That's a great question, Jennifer, because it leads into where we are going into a recession. And I think one kind of can be built off of the other. But at first, we didn't know. We were thinking companies were looking at furloughs. We didn't know where our business was going to be even after 25 years, because we are totally dependent on good cycles of M&A. And so we were a little bit of wait and see, but somewhere around March, April of 2020, it was like a switch flipped. And all of a sudden the private equity firms and the strategics were saying, we're going to buy our way out of this. And we weren't sure how that was going to go, but our business, as well as those in our industry, almost doubled in that year, and then had another record year following in 2021. So and the fact of the matter is, with so many people working remotely, MSPs actually created more value because they had a lot more to service with so many people in disparate areas. They call them COVID cities, where normally they had to work in like downtown Chicago or New York, and now can work in, Enid, Oklahoma, if that's where family is, and not miss a beat. So we see that COVID actually was something that did not affect it negatively. In fact, was a really big rise. But as we now have gone into a recession, and a lot of the experts call the recession maybe 6 or 8 months after you're already in it, we believe we're in a recession fully. And the fact of the matter is, digital transformation is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And so we don't necessarily think it's fully recession proof, but by the same token, companies in these smaller mid-market below 30 million in transaction value still need to grow. Private equity firms have already secured funds, and their full-time job is to deploy the money and help those businesses grow. And so we see a continued interest, not only from the buyer side, which you have to have in the equation, but also in the seller side. Again, harken back to baby boomers. A lot of them were thinking about selling, right before COVID, and pumped the brakes a little bit. But now, without maybe a management team to take it over, or maybe children to hand it down to, I think a lot of them are aging out and saying, I really don't want to do this anymore, and I really want to sell. So we don't think there are hundreds, or, we think there are thousands of businesses out there that are MSPs, or the cybersecurity cousin of MSSPs, that are seeking to exit.
So let's talk about that exit, because there is this magic number that is thrown around in the space, sometimes from stage, sometimes just when I'm talking to MSPs at lunch or at various events. And that magic number appears to be $5 million. That somehow when you get to that 5 million in the annual revenue, that is when your phone starts ringing. That's when you start to get viable prospects who want to buy your company. I know it happens below that sometimes, but 5 million, again, it's kind of anecdotal evidence, but are you seeing that you need to grow your business to 5 million before you should think about selling it?
Yeah, so there are a couple ways to look at that. One, there's a psychological side, that are you ready to move on and do something else? And then with that is coupled is like, how much money do I need from this? So sometimes you backwards engineer your way into, can I get X amount for my business? So if it's 15 million that you want to get out of it, and you know that multiples are, let's say, 7 to 9 times your adjusted EBITDA, you're not going to be able to sell if you have a $3 million business. We do notice, however, that when you hit that $5 million mark, and then again at 20, and then again at 50, you're attracting a different set of buyers. So at the $5 million mark, you've got companies that are, say, 50 to 250 million that see 5 million as a material add-on, both with revenue, customers, as well as talent. And that's one thing to really focus on, is that many of these acquisitions take place because there's been a shortage of talent. And with an acquisition comes a lot of certified engineers, project managers, and such that really add to the buyer's, arsenal. But in this sense, in this day and age, MSPs that are true MSPs, and you deal with them more than we do, but a lot of them will say they're an MSP with their marketing, and we dig in and there's 25, 30% recurring revenue, and they might be selling some hardware still, and they might be doing some project IT work. And it really isn't a true MSP, but those who have 85, 90% recurring revenue, who have 2-3 year contracts backing that up, those MSPs are tremendously seductive to our buyers. And we get missives every single day from private equity and strategics. What do you have? We really have this insatiable urge to keep buying, because the guys who are buying, they're faced with, do I buy or do I build? And the build sometimes just takes too long for these guys to do. So acquisition is really their only route to go.
So are there any trends that you are seeing right now in the marketplace that are maybe newer trends?
I think what we're seeing is that the companies that, let's say, some value-added resellers that were, lower valuation, but they were sitting on a pile of cash, we saw them starting to bring in first IT services standard, and then they started bringing in MSPs. And now they realize that the biggest trend is they've got to be able to offer organically a cybersecurity offering. And so instead of what had been typically an MSP partnering with an MSSP, and you're seeing them subcontract a lot of that work out, they're realizing two things. One, their margins aren't as great if they do that. But number two, there's not necessarily always a hand to shake or a throat to choke when things go south. And so I think control over having those resources in-house. And so one of the biggest things we see as a trend are MSPs really with the desire to make that acquisition of a cybersecurity firm, so their depth and breadth of services can be much wider.
So does that mean that the successful acquisitions you're seeing, they don't outsource to an MSSP, like to a vendor MSSP? They build everything in-house?
That's where we see the trend going. It doesn't mean that it has stopped. It doesn't mean that the MSPs won't have MSPs to sell into, but we're definitely seeing that as a trend. And the fact of the matter is, Jennifer, there aren't nearly enough really good quality MSSPs out there. And that's where the demand is. I mean, if someone said, hey, listen, Tim, we've got $100 million. We really want to start something up. Where do we do? I would always say, listen, go toward building both organically and inorganically through acquisitions to get to a nice sizable cybersecurity firm, because we don't think that the desire for that is ever going to cease, because the bad guys just keep getting worse and more mischievous in their way to hurt businesses. And then the second thing is those two beautiful words of recurring revenue, because true MSSPs also can get into that 90% recurring revenue through contracts. And I think those who are looking to sell, there is that misnomer oftentimes, like, what is a recurring revenue customer? In the past, they've gone in every new year and said, oh, they've always done work with us. We know we'll get revenue from them. And that truly is speculative. And those aren't really recurring customers. Recurring revenue customers are the ones that are fortified with 1, 2, 3 year contracts that are renewed. And those, by the way, are the ones that most of the buyers are interested in, because it mitigates their risk when they're going to make the acquisition. It's really difficult to lose a customer under contract, and the buyers know that. So they'll pay a premium when a lot of the customers are all wrapped up by contracts.
Yeah, that paper to prove that you have recurring revenue is so important, as opposed to just, like you said, it's speculative. Well, we know they're going to do a project with us. They always do. Well, they always do until there's a recession or there's a pandemic or their industry is hard hit with regulations or other things that are outside the control of the company that's doing the acquisition.
Oftentimes you're one contact in your customer away from losing the agreement because you've built up that relationship, and a new person in that role might likely bring in their team when they come in to succeed your contact. So that's where those contracts really are gold.
Excellent. Okay, so another area that's not really in the control of either the buyer or the seller is interest rates. So we are going into a recession, or in a recession, or maybe going into a recession, depending who you listen to. And so we're already seeing interest rates being impacted. So how is that, if you could future cast into the next, let's say 2 or 3 years, how will that impact an MSP who's listening today and thinks that they're going to sell during that time window?
Yeah, we do think the Fed's going to go another click up with interest rates yet still this year. And so for the larger deals that are very dependent on debt, interest rates make a big difference and could be the difference between getting deals done and not. So the bigger deals, $200, $300, $400 million, that usually you layer in debt to get that done with equity. For these smaller deals, when strategics or private equity have enough cash in their balance sheet to be able to do the acquisitions, they're forced to do it by their shareholders for the most part. Growing at 10, 12, 15% per annum, which is a typical growth rate of a lot of these businesses, is not satisfactory for the shareholders. So they're under the gun to be able to grow faster, and that's where the acquisitions come in. So if they don't have to laden the deal with debt, it isn't as affected by what's happening with interest rates. But we do see the larger deals likely being affected. The one area that I will mention as well is that if buyers are backing off because they don't have the wherewithal to make an acquisition without debt, some of the buyers may see this an opportunity to low bid or low ball the offers. And so that may happen with some of the buyers, but again, we're very bullish on these high recurring revenue businesses that are good quality business, aren't necessarily a startup. They've got a lot of miles in the rearview mirror. We still see those companies holding their valuations going through this recession.
So one of the things that I have seen shifting in the last year or so on the MSP side and the mergers and acquisitions side, not of the vendors, but of the MSPs, is this interest of the private equity firms. So we've now got PE that's not just interested in the vendors, but they're also interested in acquiring MSPs. And then kind of in a parallel swim lane, I'm also seeing more and more of the larger IT companies, not necessarily privately backed, private equity backed, starting to look at acquisition as a strategic growth strategy. And that is their business development strategy. That is their marketing strategy, if you will. And so we've got PE backed, and then we've got the company who buys an MSP for strategic reasons, but isn't necessarily PE backed. How does those two categories of purchase affect the valuation that an MSP can expect to get?
Years ago, we had seen a difference between really numbers-driven private equity acquisitions versus kind of more ephemeral, strategic, where they dig into the culture and they understand the chemistry, whereas the number crunching kind of, formulaic acquisitions from private equity were a little bit different. But now, based on just the amount of information that's out there, what it takes to get a deal done, we've seen those two worlds kind of collide and come together as far as valuations. So we don't see nearly the disparate offers between strategic and private equity as we used to, but there's a difference for the seller. So with many private equity firms buying, let's say if you've got an MSP that's over 20, 25 million in revenue, they're a candidate to be the platform under which private equity will layer more acquisitions. So they buy the one, and then do an assemblage of companies under it. They used to call it roll-up, but now assemblage of businesses underneath it. Whereas other private equity backed portfolio companies have the money behind private equity, but they are basically pieces of the puzzle that go in. So that they act more like a strategic buyer that happens to have private equity behind them. The other category that is most prominent are the strategics that, let's say, they get into, 100, 200, 300 million, and they know that they have to keep growing in order to have what we call accretive value, that acquisitions they make today at 7 or 8x might be worth 11 or 12x down the road. And those are going. But, to your point a little bit earlier, we are seeing larger Accentures, KPMGs swimming downstream to smaller acquisitions that we never thought or saw before. Because when those guys dig in and do due diligence, they're in. And oftentimes, unless the acquisition is much larger, they can ill afford the time to do those deals. But because there's such a shortage of that upper mid-market $200-300 million deal, then they could make a series of $20 million, $30 million deals. And it might not make headlines, but it does impact their revenue. And then again, that all important resource, they're able to bring in, 30 or 40 certified fill in the blank Microsoft engineers or private project managers. And those are the type of things that we're seeing the larger businesses swim downstream for.
Interesting. Okay, so if we go out of into more of a tactical approach for just a couple of minutes, when you're sitting at the table and you're watching an acquisition happen, so it's almost always the larger company acquiring the smaller company, there is the sense that the smaller company is at a bit of a disadvantage because they've never done this before. So what are some common mistakes that you see in the books of the MSP or the way that the MSP is presenting themselves that you're thinking in the back of your head, man, if you would have just done these things over the last 2 or 3 years or even the last 18 months, maybe you would have been positioned in a better way, maybe even have gotten a better multiple?
Yeah, so a lot of these guys don't realize that there are very unique times of your life that you are both a buyer and a seller. So when you're dating someone and get married, you're kind of a buyer and a seller at the same time. In this process too, you're obviously selling yourself and the attributes that you have in business, but you also are a buyer because most of these deals are going to have an earnout. Could be 18 months, as long as, let's say, 36 months. So you do have to be a buyer to buy in on the strategies, the leadership that's there that are going to steward this new business that you're handing your keys over to. And your earnout is going to be dependent on the success of what happens. So a lot of these sellers don't realize they do have leverage, and they should know that they're a buyer and seller. Number two, some of the smaller businesses that are run on QuickBooks, perfectly fine. I mean, our buyers are very used to QuickBooks. It's become very robust in the kind of reports it can generate. But if the information's not in the right categories, the right places, no matter how many times you slice and dice it out of QuickBooks, it's going to be very wonky. And that's one of the first warning signs for buyers to kind of do a back bend a little bit and say, we're out. So having it's a very good accountant to come in and do an audit to prepare and make sure that they stand in the shoes of a buyer and say, if we were to come in and look at your books, what do they look like? So at the point that you're in midstream in negotiations with a buyer and they keep asking for more and more information, you can in fact press the button and the right things come out for them. Number three is, understanding that your brand matters. How your brand is perceived online, whether it's through social, web, your marketing efforts. If you have that all buttoned up beautifully and it's a nice humming machine, then the buyers will realize that, beyond it is just not your relationships with your clients, but there is a business development tool that can bring in and do more business. Certainly, to be able to forecast your pipeline pretty well and look and say, are your numbers going up and to the right? Because most buyers that look at a company that's flat or maybe has gone backwards a little bit, they look at it as a distressed business and lower valuations will follow. And so the timing we mentioned a few minutes ago about when the right time to go to market is it my size and such? Well, high growth businesses is one of the greatest indicators of being able to sell. And the timing of that is really important because a lot of our sellers time it wrong where they're growing. And then they go to market and they kind of flatten out.
Interesting.
So you really want to get it when you're on the upward trend so that you're demonstrating to the buyers that this is a company that's on fire and they're doing really well in their growth, stemming from business development, but then how do you execute that business once it comes in?
So what type of multiples are you seeing then? And is there a difference between a true MSP versus an MSSP?
Yeah, there is. MSSPs right now are probably top of the food chain in this space because cyber is so hot, because cyber resources are very difficult to get and keep. And so we're seeing multiples in the last year and a half of multiples of revenue. And so those multiples of revenues can go anywhere between 1.75 to as high as 2.5 times revenue. And that's really great news for these cybersecurity firms that have built good infrastructure with good clientele. Now, we should note that one of the valuation indicators is your customer concentration. So if you've got one customer that's got 60% of your revenue, you're going to get dinged on your valuation because, common sense.
It's a risk.
Common sense. Buyer comes in and says, what if we lose 60% person? And all of a sudden the business isn't what we just purchased. So 10, 15% for your largest customers, and you'll be able to get the highest valuation. That is good for both MSPs and MSSPs as far as your customer concentration. But for MSPs, they are still a multiple of your adjusted EBITDA. And so for that, we've been seeing pretty consistently somewhere in that 7, 8, 9.5 times adjusted EBITDA, that range. And again, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what multiple because each company is different. It could be a geographic location that a buyer is needing to get in or wanting to. It could be, again, the type of services there are, what the service mix might be. If you're not truly an MSP and you've got other project related, you're going to have a lesser valuation than you would for that beautiful golden goose that is at 95% with contracts backing it up. So I've said that now 3 times in this discussion with you, but I just want to underscore the importance of that as you're looking to sell. And if you're looking at doing a 2 to 3 year plan and then exit, that recurring revenue with a good customer concentration is one of the best 1-2 punches you can have.
Excellent. Okay, so I want you to get out your crystal ball and tell me what you think is coming in the next year to year and a half.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the fact that digital transformation and all the different accoutrements that go along with that, we don't see a break in that for at least another decade. There's so much to be done there. And we don't see a lot of companies going back to the model of bringing everybody in-house to manage the IT behind it. So businesses like yours that are coaching and helping these MSPs, and particularly with their sales and marketing, we see that continuing to have an upward trend. We do see, going back to that merger between MSPs and MSSPs, being a much more powerful force. And that way MSSPs know where all the revenue is coming from. We do see a lot of the traditional, let's say, Microsoft partners knowing that a lot of that recurring revenue through a managed services model, Azure alone gives them that entree into it. We see Microsoft staying white hot, and they've been, even though they've maintained themselves as one of the most valuable companies in the world for 25 years running, inside of Microsoft has not always been that smooth. Leadership changes, products being released too fast. And so we now think that they have kind of figured out the formula on a lot of it. And we not only have a record number of buyers looking for Microsoft partners, but a record number of channel partners that are looking to exit. And so we see, Microsoft, ServiceNow, Oracle, Salesforce as being the big 4 that are just continuing to grow. And a lot of them are looking toward, whether it's through cloud and other services, to have that managed services model as part of their vendor relationship with those behemoths.
So you just mentioned that we do have a large population in this channel that are aging. They're at that, mid 50s into the 60-year-old owner operator that are looking to close or get acquired. And so there's a little bit, I'm concerned that there may be a glut on the marketplace in 5 years, 7 years. Is that what you're seeing as well? Or do you think there's enough demand that many of those companies will be able to be acquired?
Yeah, we think that there is enough demand only for the fact that we keep our finger on the pulse of those buyers. That if anything is our secret sauce, it's our relationship with the buyers. Everybody who looks like us has very similar process, and you get to due diligence and you get to the sale. That kind of stays the same. But where we hang our hat on is really having this database of over 50,000 buyers around the world. And we talk to them on a regular basis. And what we're hearing is that it may not be insatiable, but it is a strong movement to continue to buy. Now, the thing about timing goes is that if you look at being baby boomers, and when you said mid 50s, it's like I was going to say, watch it. A lot of us are in that age group now, but you don't want to let it go too far where health is now an issue and you're forced to sell because of health issues. And so, there is usually that tail. And I think once the mirror tells you, hey, I think it's time to start winding down and look for a sale, my advice is that's when you go to market, because your enthusiasm is only going to wane more as time goes on, and buyers can read that right off the bat. You can't fake the energy and the enthusiasm for it. And most of them want the founders to stay for a while. And so that's a good thing for both sides. But if you run into a health issue or a family related issue and you want to walk away quickly, then the buyers have got you. They're now, they smell it, and their evaluations will be, put forth accordingly. So I don't necessarily see the glut, but I do see the timing issue for the baby boomers. And then I do think that we're in a stage right now where you either need to be a buyer or a seller. That independent MSP that's growing just organically, over the next 3 to 5 years, we don't think they're going to have the breadth of services to be able to offer to stay competitive. And so whether you want to raise some cash and be that buyer and start assembling underneath you, otherwise, I really think over the next 3 to 5 years, you really should think about selling. Now, that I know sounds like you're asking a barber if they need a haircut or not. And it's not a scary tactic of like the good hands people, pay me now, pay me later. It's just the trends that we're seeing where, most of these guys, their entire net worth is tied up in their business, even though they may make a good living providing for their family. But if that in fact is your biggest hit or your biggest win at the end, you don't want to be caught on the backside of a group going to market.
Okay, so we've spoken about this throughout, and so I have a feeling I know what your answer will be for this question. But one of the things that we talked about teasing this particular event is that you would reveal some things that MSPs and MSSPs can start to do today, even if they don't plan to sell for 2 or 3 years. So what are some of those levers that people should start to think about today so that they are best positioned for market?
Yeah, I think team, the teamwork side of it is big, so that you have someone who's a number 2 that you can rely on, that in your absence, if you do want to exit, there's a logical succession plan in place. So really important to have the infrastructure fortified. Secondly, I'll go back to having impeccable books. Buyers, they're professional, due diligence professionals. I mean, that's what they do. And so you want to make sure that you can have that in order. Your legal papers, so your operating agreements, legal, you want to have that tied up as well in a bow. So talk to your attorney about kind of getting in position to be in position for a sale. Double down on whatever your advertising is. I'm so surprised that many of these guys don't have any advertising plan. they kind of like, well, business just kind of comes to us and word of mouth is great. They would be surprised that even a minimal amount of Google ads, Meta on Facebook, LinkedIn, paid advertising that have gotten very intelligent in the way that the algorithms work to be able to get people out there, but to develop that brand through even a minimal effort of advertising, but certainly having a business development person besides the owner going out to bring in fresh clients, we think is critical. And then beyond that is again, the timing, making sure that both psychologically you're ready, but as well as the business still growing is really there. Those are the things that we look as value drivers for it. Certainly to make sure that, your margins are strong. We're thinking, the best ones are in that 45-50% range, certainly. And these are things that you talk to a lot of your clients about on a regular basis and what makes it, strong. And I do think, by the way, the focus of your business is the right place at the right time for these MSPs to listen and get that external view, because the way that you go in and have your eyes on the business and you get to know your clients and being able to put forth a roadmap for that. So it's a roadmap whether or not they want to grow quickly or if it's a roadmap toward an exit, but you got to have that plan. I think, the fact of throwing it out to the universe or however you believe that is going to be, in the end, expectations unarticulated is disappointment guaranteed. One of my favorite mentors has always driven that into my head. And so if you don't put an expectation for yourself and your staff, then you don't even know if you're successful or not. So someone's going to be disappointed at that point. So I think those are, some of the tips we'd say that are the value creators. We're always happy to speak with people who'd like to learn a little bit more so that we can get them in position. And even if it is a couple years off, we're happy to talk with them, about what we're seeing and how we can at least get them, again, in position to be in position for a sale.
I was actually going to ask you that. So when is the best time to engage with ITX and at least have that initial conversation? Is it today, even if, the horizon is 2, 3, 4 years away?
It sure is. And it's funny too, Jennifer, because in those discussions that take place today, looking out 2 to 3 years, I will tell you a majority of those conversations lead into, I think I'm ready, because they don't really understand necessarily how ready they are. And typically when they start talking about the sale and thinking I might be ready in a few years, it's usually a little bit sooner than that, than they're ready to go. And usually they talk to their spouse or significant other about what might be next. We find a lot of these guys, even when they're mid 40s, they've been doing it for 15 years and they're saying, love the space, I just don't want to do this anymore. So they're great candidates as well to, again, create a little bit of wealth. And those guys that exit and have a pretty good win, it's a lot easier to then attract capital for their next startup if they could show a very successful exit.
Yes.
And so the types of people, the who that come to us are all over the spectrum. And we've had guys with software as a service businesses where they were a software developer and thought it'd be cool to launch a business, and then said, holy moly, we're in HR up to our neck. I hate thinking about sales and all that. And really they want to have a good job in a great company and get something back for the hard work that they've maintained. So you've got those guys all the way up to those who've been doing it for 40 years and want to retire.
Amazing. Such good information. All right. So guys, this is why I wanted to introduce you to the team over at ITX. Tim is doing some great things. You're going to be seeing posts inside the group. His team has committed to sharing. There's some checklists. There's some tip sheets. There's all kinds of stuff. And I'm doing this because I'm watching the MSP world, and so many companies are either aging to the point where they want to sell. I've had 3 conversations in the last month where people are saying, I don't want to do the security thing. The security thing is scary and it's a huge liability. And I'm thinking this is my time to exit and ride off into the sunset and let someone else take over for me, and they can tackle security if they choose to. So just looking to see if any questions have come into the live stream. I'm not, oh, yes, a question just popped up. Is today a good time to be a buyer?
Yeah, so I will tell you that there's still a great inventory of sellers. And so that is usually a good sign for that the buyers are there. Now, I think some buyers who are just entering the market are feeling that they can get a great deal on these companies. And I'm here to tell you again, the well-run MSPs that are out there are not value buys. They don't need to come down in price. And therefore, the buyers that come in thinking they're going to get a low ball type of opportunity, it's not there. It is the right time, I would say, as a buyer, if in fact, you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar, that you want to grow by acquisition, and then potentially package your business up down the road to sell. But again, I'll go back to the line I had a few minutes ago. I think at this stage, you are either a buyer or a seller. To just do organic growth, I think is going to be too hard over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I was chatting with someone at an event a couple of months back, and his entire strategy is to acquire, and they will be acquiring. I think his goal for 2023 was seven smaller MSPs that he probably one at a time, roughly every other month or so. And that is his entire, he said, I can put the same amount of time, energy, and effort into that as I would into marketing. And to him, it's more fun, it's easier. They figured out how to integrate the companies. And so he said, that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And I see myself riding that trend for quite a while. And so I think I liked your point that you're not looking for a bargain basement fire sale. You're looking for a well-run company, because that will be the easier option to fold into your company, to acquire maybe some IP, some human capital, some relationships that you don't have. Hopefully the owner that will stay on and be part of the new team. None of that is in place if you're acquiring a sloppily run organization. That's not necessarily who you want to acquire.
So. I agree. And I do think, Jennifer, that having someone who understands how to integrate that company to fold them in is incredibly important. There are two things that bring up, almost 50% of the deals that take place have some kind of negative reaction. They might lose customers, they might lose employees. So to be on the other side of that 50%, have somebody, or even if it's a consultant, that understands how to integrate the culture, the processes, the sales and marketing into the acquiring company, so that you could avoid those negative issues of M&A. And those guys are the first time in on it. Do your homework. Talk to guys like us if you're a buyer. And that way we can give you a little bit of a roadmap on what to think about. Integrating one a month or one every other month is really aggressive.
Very.
But if they've got the talent and the intestinal fortitude to have so many different cultures coming in and not worrying about being swallowed up by all of that, the machinations involved in that, all great, and likely they'll go for a pretty penny down the road. But that is aggressive. A lot of our customers try to do one every 6 months. That could be a material change to theirs. Just enough time so they can, get the founder situated, make sure they feel valued, make sure the customers come over and without too many major changes that are taking place. And they're a lot more methodical. The big guys, the real big guys, I think GE at one point bought 117 companies in a year. And that's a machine, and knowing that they'll likely lose 50% of those in some kind of negative side of it. But the big picture, I guess, to sum it up, is we're very bullish still on these lower mid-market businesses going in. We're bullish about the future for digital transformation with MSPs and the role that they continue to play. We don't believe a lot of people are going to bring in a lot of their talent in-house. So MSPs have a pretty long runway for growth. But, the market says, what are the breadth and depth of the services you have? And that, I think, influences really what your strategic plan is going to have.
Amazing. Okay, good. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Not seeing any coming in. Thank you so much for your time. We are up against the top of the hour. That hour flew. How crazy is
Wow.
that? All right, guys, like I said, ITX, you'll be seeing more from them. We'll make sure there's a link. I'll post the link inside of this live stream as a comment, but reach out to Tim and his team. You'll see several of his team members inside of the Facebook group, and they're also active on LinkedIn as well. So if that's your preferred platform, reach out to them there. And thank you again for everything you're doing in the community.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Same to you. We look forward to continuing our partnership with you.
Likewise. Have a great day.
You as well.